So my name is Mikhal Lambert. Basically I'm a community worker. I like to consider myself a change agent. I primarily use organic agriculture as a tool for social change. So how do we use food production, sustainability, environmental awareness to spark an interest in communities on how they can take responsibility for, first of all, their food security, and then moving into other aspects of community development.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about where you're based and what this farm does?
So I'm based here at the Goedgedacht Farm, which is owned by the Goedgedacht Trust. The trust is primarily set up for exploring how to develop rural communities, specifically looking at children. And in the last few years, we've expanded the scope so that it's really about communities, because it's communities that look after children. So a lot of what our work is, it's about taking a very long-term approach to saying what needs to be ignited in a community for them to take care of their children in a way that the children grow up to transform the way the community works on a whole range of levels. So politically, socio-economic things, how does the community deal with drugs, violence, gender-based violence especially, and the thinking around it is that something has to change in the children, because trying to change the parents it's definitely worthwhile, but our experience and our expertise is much closer to working with children. So in terms of agriculture, the approach of the Care for the Planet department is to say, what do we have to do to get parents to grow food so that they're serving their children the best possible food? And in a lot of the communities we work in, there isn't a shop where you can buy spinach and beetroot and cabbage. It's spaza shops. There's no transport infrastructure to get them to a Pick and Pay or anything like that. So oftentimes low-income communities don't have access to their own transport. When they don't have a community transport network, buses, taxis that operates with any kind of regularity as you might be used to in an urban space, people are dependent on whatever sold in the spaza shop, which is often canned foods, dried foods, and things that can last a long time, like onions and potatoes. So you won't find spinach, you won't find tomatoes, you won't find cabbage or carrots or beetroots. You'll find lots of dried things in packets or in cans.
Can you explain the area that this farm is located and the Malmesbury greater surrounds?
So the Goedgedacht Farm is based just outside of Malmesbury. So we're 15 k's out of Malmesbury in the Riebeeksrivier Valley. We've got the Kasteelberg behind us. So we're right up against the slopes of the mountain. We can vaguely in the distance see Table Mountain. So we're about 80 k's from Cape Town and just outside of Malmesbury. This is normally known as the breadbasket, because this is where there's a lot of wheat. Wheat, grapes are pretty much the most common crops that you'll find around here.
All right. Across the road there is an oil factory. Can you tell us a bit about it?
So the Goedgedacht Trust owns two farms, the Goedgedacht Farm and Welbeloon. And then in order to sustain the activities of the farm, there's three income generators. So there is a conference center and wedding venue. There's also a series of shops, second-hand shops based in Cape Town called Help the Rural Child. And then we farm olives on this farm. And then we've got an olive oil factory on the neighboring farm, Welbeloon, where the olive oil is produced. So when you go to Pick and Pay or Woolworths and you buy Goedgedacht oil, it's oil that is, the plants are grown here in the Western Cape. The oil is made right here in the Western Cape. So there's a very short line from us to the end customer.
Awesome. So when the kids come to the Goedgedacht Farm for a program, what would that involve?
So there's, prior to Corona, there was something like 34 different projects that were being run from the team that's based here at Goedgedacht. Most of these projects are in the surrounding communities. So we work in up to 13 different communities where we've got community centers, which are called POP centers. And POP is the acronym for Path Onto Prosperity, which looks at a four-pronged approach to addressing social inequality. And that's based around personal development, which I like to think of as the heart space, health and nutrition, which is the body, education support, which is the mind or the brain, and then care for the planet, which is the environmental part, the food security, food sovereignty conversation. So in the various communities, and these communities range from Riverlands, Chatsworth, Kalbaskraal, Abbotsdale, Riebeeksrivier, Riebeek West, Riebeek Kasteel, Hermon, Gouda, Saron, Porterville, Piketberg, and there's even one center which is out in Prince Albert, which is in the Klein Karoo.
Do you get funding from government, and what is your relationship with government like?
In terms of how all of this is funded, primarily it's funded through our own operations. So the founder of this farm, Peter and Ann Templeton, they were extraordinarily big in their vision. So they knew that they wanted this work to continue even beyond them, which is why when they started the farm, they set up these 3 income generators, or they primarily started with the olive oil farm, and the farm then got developed so that it could have weddings and conferences. But that's not enough to sustain the extent of the projects. So we rely a lot on the people of South Africa, especially the people of the Western Cape, who fund us in monthly contributions of 120 Rand. Some people give more. Some people also, we've recently received a very nice contribution from a woman who left us as one of the beneficiaries in her will. And then also there's people that just feel that they want to play a role in social development, and they make really significant contributions to our work. So when it comes to government, the Lotto has supported us, and Lotto you apply every year. A lot of our funding comes from international donors, so we're constantly on the lookout for funding to be able to expand projects, to keep projects alive. So it's a very integrated fundraising approach, from making your own money and getting support from locals and then internationals, with governments contributing significantly in a variety of different ways through various different departments, like the Department of Social Development. They contribute significantly to our work with children. So the POP program starts from the time that the woman is pregnant, and the first program is called the First 1,000 Days. The first 1,000 days of life are pretty much from conception to about the age of 2 years old. So internationally, there's been a lot of increasing proof that shows that if you're able to make sure that in that first 1,000 days, the fetus and then the baby is given the very best in terms of physical nutrition, emotional and intellectual stimulation and support, that child has a much greater chance of realizing its potential because of the impact of those first 1,000 days, than if the mother is not eating properly when she's pregnant, if she's drinking or she's smoking. These things play a major role in shaping how much of the child's potential can be realized.
In the process of starting a new project with communities, can you tell us a little bit about it?
So our development approach has over the years changed, and now recently we're moving more towards what's called an ABCD, asset-based community-led development. And this is opposed to a needs-based approach. So in the past, as a civil society organization, we would go into a community and say, okay, so what do you need in this community? And then we would work to somehow satisfy that need. So people would say things like, we need more creches, or we need a feeding scheme, or we need any one of a million things that people need. That's been the mode of development since forever. One person coming or one group coming in to meet the needs of another group. The asset-based community-led development approach differs slightly in that it starts by saying, so what do you have in this community? And what we found is starting the conversation around what people already have puts them in a much stronger position. It also makes the conversation end on a high note, because when someone has rattled off the hundreds of things that they have, like when I'm in need, I can go and ask my neighbor for some rice and I don't feel embarrassed. When there's a problem in the community, I can ask the people around me to help me to solve that problem. I've got a lot of love and community support and all of those kinds of things. All of a sudden, the conversation changes significantly and people feel much more empowered. And then from that perspective, what's happening is that people are feeling that they can actually make changes where they live. They can develop their own ideas for what needs to happen. They can, as opposed to this dependency mode that so many of us in South Africa are caught in, which is the government must do this. If those people do that, then we can do this. So it's shifting that conversation to saying, oh, what can we do right now to improve our living conditions? And that talks about the asset base. The community-led approach is that instead of us coming in and doing things, instead what we do is we say, what do you have and what do you want to do with it? So our role becomes much more as facilitators and supporting community members to do what they want to do, rather than us coming up with a project and then saying to them, this is what you all must do in order to develop yourselves. They end up saying, this is what we want to do to develop our community.
So you've also got another project where you are helping communities grow their own food. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So the department I work in is called Care for the Planet. Our primary objective is how do we inspire people to start to look after their environment? So one way is to connect people in a more intimate way to what comes out of their environment. And being a farmer, obviously I want to connect people to how they grow food, how they take care of themselves, how they take care of their communities, and how they tend to own the food system to a greater extent. So over the we started in 2016, working in 7 communities, and we started working on what do we have to do to ignite this passion around small-scale organic agriculture. We started, first of all, by building relationships with the community. So we would spend up to 8 months just walking the streets, visiting a community 2, 3, 4 times a month, but just walking around every street, talking to anyone who was available, and just kind of getting ourselves known and getting to know who's doing what in the community. And at some point we would ask the question, are you interested in growing food? And for those people that said, yes, we are interested, we would say, cool, because that's what we do. And then we would say, well, and we would time it also with the seasons. So when we knew that it was coming up towards planting time, we would say things like, if you get your beds ready, we'll bring you some seeds. And we buy seed in bulk. So this is often what we're having to raise money for, is things like seed. We buy them in bulk. Then we repackage them into small family-sized packs. and a family-sized pack would contain anywhere between 5 and 9 different kinds of vegetables, which would be kind of all the staples like onions, spinach, beetroot, carrots, cabbage, kale, lettuce, tomato, brinjal, maize, those kinds of things that people could grow in their backyards. Yeah, and then for the people that do get their beds ready, then we give them a seed pack. And we started in June of 2016 with this approach. We didn't really know how we were going to do it. It was just a lot of reviewing on a daily basis. How did it go yesterday and what do we need to change? And we started by offering training and a whole lot of things which we subsequently realized we don't have to do, because people know how to grow food. And my experience has been that even if you ask children, how do you grow a plant? They'll tell you, you take the seed, you put it in the ground, you cover it with some soil, you give it some water, and it'll grow. And that's essentially how it works, especially in small-scale organic agriculture where people are growing in pots, they're growing around their homes, they buying a seedling here, they're buying a pack of seeds there, and they're just growing for themselves. So it is very, very simple. Yeah, so we would encourage people to grow their own seedlings and then grow their own gardens. And one of the assumptions about our process was that community members can influence each other much more than we can. And the way that we tested that was to say, if it's true, we'll see gardens start to emerge in clusters. So when we started in June of 2016, by the end of the year, we had counted 193 gardens across all the communities we were working in. And by the time we ended the first phase of the project, which was December 2019, that number had grown to 2,563. And while it might be very nice to say that was because of us, the truth is it wasn't. It was because of community members doing what they wanted to do. And oftentimes we would hear stories of, can I get some more seeds? Because the seeds you gave me, I gave to my neighbor. Or I grew half and I gave half of the seedlings to my neighbor, but now my other neighbor wants. So just by feeding the people who already wanted to do it, we saw them influencing each other, which is how by, in a 2.5-year period, we increased from 193 to over 2,500. And that really captures the essence of the approach, which is moving away from telling people what to do and supporting them to do what they want to do, which I think has really been at the heart of our success. I do want to say that a lot of it is based on the work of other people. So one of my personal heroes is Rob Small, and he's been doing this kind of work since the 80s. And he set up an organization called Abalimi Bezakaya with a whole lot of other amazing people who have really pioneered this approach in conjunction with other approaches and trying different things. So, the phrase or the saying, we stand on the shoulders of giants so we can see a little further, is really true for us. I have the benefit of amazing people that came before me that pioneered the ideas, a lot of my teachers and the people that really paved the way for this success to happen. So, we on paper, we look at the success having happened since 2016 and in this project, but we're very keenly aware that the people who were doing this work in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the early 2000s, they've paved the way for us. So we're really just standing on their shoulders.
So what are some of the success stories you've witnessed?
We've been very blessed when it comes to successes because we just get to tell community stories. Some of the successes that we've seen are not always what we would define as the objectives that our projects set out to do. It's often the unintended consequences of our projects. So the building of stronger community networks, which has emerged because of gardeners having access to seed and a network of peer-to-peer support. So because there's more and more of them talking about gardening, the training is happening in an informal way. There's also more people who are now making money from selling over the fence. So we don't encourage people to take their vegetables to the market, because when you get to the market sets the price. Instead, we say, put a sign on your gate that says spinach for sale, cabbage, whatever. And then when people want it, that's when you harvest it. So the customer, who's their neighbor, gets the best quality organic vegetables that's just been picked. And then the gardener gets cash immediately, and there's no storage, there's no transport. So those are a lot of our success stories. And those were our early success stories. The success stories now are starting to change, in that they are starting to be a lot around community members who have taken on a lot of our work and are building their own groups. So they're building what we call garden hubs. They're doing it with no external resources. So people meet at someone's house at a community center and they repack all the seeds. Then they distribute it themselves. Then they connect with the gardeners in their road, in their community, and just find out what they're growing. And then they start networking all these growers into informal communities of gardeners. And then out of that, people are starting to say, well, can we buy all your chilies and make chili jam? So this is now secondary processing that's starting to emerge in a much more natural way, rather than us coming in and saying, okay, so now we're going to teach you how to make chili jam. Because the truth is, they already know. You know, often in my personal capacity, I'm buying stuff from these people. I'm buying pickled onions and chili pickles and vegetable pickles. I'm buying produce from them, so I can't grow everything myself. So I often get things like sweet potatoes and beetroots. I've got some beautiful carrots in the fridge now, which are coming in from these communities. At one stage, we'd even networked them to sell all these gardeners were selling their vegetables to a group in Stellenbosch, who were then selling it. They had a market, you know. So yeah, the successes are usually around community networking and solidarity, even though there are lots of successes around gardens. You know, like I can show you lots of little videos and photos and stories about individual gardeners who are they now have a buffer between that end of the month poverty. So we all know what it's, you know, the end of the month salty crack. There was even an advert about how at the end of the month you're no longer eating the nice things, you're now eating. Now people have a living buffer. When it gets to the end of the month and they don't have money for meat, they go into the garden and they scuttle and they find there's a pot of food, you know, just from that's growing outside their yard. Or the neighbors are coming to them and saying, hey, how's some spinach? And you know, while we encourage people to sell, that's not where we start. In fact, where the communities have started is they've started building social capital, which is they know that their neighbor is in need. And they send the child over with a cabbage and say, take that to Auntie Mary. You know, and then the child just says, Auntie Mary, my mother said I must give you this, you know, and that builds social capital, which when we're so fixated on money, we miss. And that's the real stuff that allows communities to flourish, because they are essentially networks of human beings supporting human beings. And I think that's really our biggest success.
So, where did you grow up?